almost ready. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to this open table. The guest today is Hale Tenger. Welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to all of you for being here. The open table is the third section of the exhibition conceived by Christine Marcel to focus and to deepen our knowledge about the artists and their practice. So it's the possibility to have an informal lunch with the artist, and it is supposed that you are going to eat, so don't be shy to start eating when the, the meals will arrive. And of course, it is supposed that you are going to do some question to our artist today, so don't be shy, even if I will ask you to speak with the microphone, to talk with the microphone, because we are recording and streaming. So Hale Tenger is exhibiting here an artwork, a video that you should have seen here in the Corderie, Balloons on the Sea. It's an artwork of 2011, so it's not really conceived for this exhibition, but we know that Christine Marcel wanted from the first time that work very much. So shall you introduce your piece here, and then we...
Okay. Am I okay with the
yes,
mic?
it's
okay.
working.
Balloons on the Sea, as she said, Maria, I made first time in 2011 for a solo exhibition in Dubai at Green Art Gallery. And when I was preparing the work, it was the beginning of Arab Spring, etc. So you can have a guess with the background climate, when the work came up. I also should say that where the work is stemming from, maybe I will just pass it by. From 2005, I have a photo work, a sea print, taken, maybe you can pass it by. It is again Balloons on the Sea. This is a pastime event thing in Turkey, along the coasts, seashores. They lay balloons on the sea. You give a few bucks and you get the air gun rifle and try to shoot at the balloons. So that photograph I took was in Izmir. In the Corniche of Izmir. Just by chance I came across, and this guy was renting this air gun. And, but behind the balloons laid on the sea were NATO warships. So that was an interesting shot for me. And years after that, I wanted to go back to the idea with a video this time. But I didn't want to show the shooting part at all. No guns, no shooting. So as you already know, perhaps, you enter the exhibition with the main wall, with the reversed image of Balloons on the Sea. And that is why I made it like that. My idea, I had two ideas of doing it. First, to reduce the joyfulness of it, so that the reflections are on top and the real ones are on the bottom, so it becomes a little bit more claustrophobic, like you are yourself like under the sea, as if you are not able to breathe properly, kind of. And also this idea of reality, reflection, which is reality, what is not reality, etc., that notion. Also, maybe I should say, like, I see those balloons, for me, are not like such a joyful event, although some people enjoy as a pastime. For me, they're really poor things, like prisoners shackled to each other, waiting in front of a death squad, you know, like taka 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 kind of thing. So I see them as like waiting for their freedom, but really not being able to do so. Also, balloon as an object itself is hardly to call an object. So it takes shape, it becomes a real object with our breathing in it. It is nefes in Turkish, nafas in Farsi, etc. It is important, of course, in all of our cultural heritage, let's say, this breathing, in the histories of the religious books, in our daily life, everywhere. So it takes form with our breathing, but it is an ephemeral object, so it won't stay like that forever. It would lose and become out of shape after a while. As I started saying, you are first seeing the main screen, of course the music all the time, all around. So in the back, although you don't see at the beginning, once you walk to the back, you come across with these 6 screens of single balloons, each in different colors. Each of them randomly pop, and so you can never know which one will pop up when. But as they pop off, they come back again. So it's a kind of cycle that goes on and on. And also, each balloon has its own sound. So the red balloon has a more robust sound. The white one is a really kind of light and hard to notice kind of sound. So the music, the audio you listen in the space is also something you experience randomly, because the balloons are popping up randomly, so their sound is also, so it's not a constant same thing all the time. Why I make those single balloons come back? For me, few things. One is resistance. Oppression cannot last forever anywhere. It hurts. It can go on for a long time, but not for forever. So for me, they are like maybe faceless, invisible people. For now, for the past, maybe for the future, etc., for us to think about. And also, our quality of life as human beings, we are on this precious planet Earth, which we don't really appreciate in the way we are consuming it. Just to remind ourselves our own ephemeral being over here. So it is going on these two sides, social, political, and also on our very own way of being in this planet.
So you already mentioned a very important part of this exhibition, but of lots of your installation and artworks, which is the sound. So even the synesthesia that occurs when the sound is associated to a visual image. So you were saying the balloons, the red balloon had its own sound, and so on. And so you have a sound architect, and you collaborate with him
a lot.
A lot. And for you, sound it's very important, even in your previous works. Can you maybe explain a little bit about it?
I consider myself so lucky because I have this musician friend, a close friend. His name is Serdar Ateşer, whom I have been collaborating with since 1992, I guess. I started having my first exhibition in 1990, so it was really at the beginning, almost at the beginning. The first one started as an installation where I wanted to use, it was called Portrait of Kant, Immanuel Kant, and I wanted to use sound of a very strong storm. Of course, I called him and he just found the right thing for me. But the next time, in 1993, when the Bosnia war was going on, I made a work interviewing refugees who escaped from Bosnia war, and the international intervention didn't take place at that time yet, and I felt uneasy, that feeling like I should do something, so I was making visits to refugee camps in Turkey. I was able to record their voices. I was not allowed to take videos and photographs. Anyway, so I came up with an installation. For 5 months, I collected images from all kinds of media. I made them like Xerox copies and put them in jars filled with water. So it was like a library of images of these jars. But then I also wanted to use their voices, because that's all I had. And I asked Serdar to, just to edit those interview recordings, taking off my voice, my translators. And I just told him, like, put them a little bit, like one is close to me, the other one is a little bit far away. That was the whole idea I could have. And he came up with something more. He added a kind of a sound that I would explain like World War II, a subtle World War II air plane, warplane sound, machine, motor sound.
Engine.
And the kind of like in the background. So that opened up things for me, like thinking more wide, in a wide manner about sound, audio, etc. So ever since then, we have been working with them. For this installation, I gave him the main video that I'm using here. I told him I want something that makes one feel relaxed, but at the same time under pressure, stressed. So he came up with this beautiful sound for me, music, I should say. So, I mean, we have been working like this with him. Once I can say that he was very busy, and I had to work on a project and finish it. So I tried with another musician. It didn't work. So I am really lucky that each time, whatever he came up with in all of my works, he came up with beautiful audios, musics.
The artwork that you mentioned, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Death and Descent.
Decent Death Watch, Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Allows me to talk about and to ask you about your idea of media, about media information, and even the manipulation of the public opinion that you try to underline in your artworks, because in some installation you use the radio broadcast as a sound, and of course in these artworks you use the images of the newspapers. So one of the main theme of your pieces were yes, the media, and the fact that we are a bit disoriented by what we hear. Yeah. So it's really connected to the politics.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And especially nowadays, not only in Turkey, but it's like a kind of war going on. Which one is the real news? Which one is the fake news? Each side claims mine is the real news. So it's like getting out of control kind of thing. So it's like maybe a virus now, like that spread all over. We had it in Turkey, but now it's in the United States, everywhere, kind of. So, of course, it is a crucial point for our individual rights to be able to reach real news,
Yes,
not the
true
fake
news.
ones, not to be brainwashed, so have an access to what's going on exactly. It is crucial for me, of course.
And yesterday you told me that you tweet a lot for political reason, and
I
you
did.
use it, the social network, for political
I use
tweets.
Twitter for
Yeah.
political things only, almost. Yeah. And for media, I can also say I made a work called I Know People Like This 3 in 2013. I went to the archives of press and photojournalists, and I collected around 3,700 images of state violence in Turkey. And from that archive, I used like around 900 images. I worked on them as I played with them, turning them into like X-ray images. And I also printed them on X-rays, real X-rays. So the exhibition was like a labyrinth that you would walk through, a giant megatoscope like the doctors use. In between, you were walking through a labyrinth of many images, starting from the most recent street clashes in the southeast of Turkey with Kurdish and the state forces. It was going back to 1955, to the 7 September events in Istanbul. It was a pogrom when the majority of Greek population was forced to leave Istanbul.
So your works are really in between what is visible or invisible, and even the historic memories and the history itself, the memories and the history itself. And you often talk about Turkey and the political situation in Turkey, but we can understand the territorialization of these problems, a globalization of these problems, because maybe you are just talking about something really specific in Turkey, but we can talk about the same problems and the same violence almost all over the world.
Political corruption is everywhere.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes.
And you did have even problems with your previous artworks, with the political and legal problems.
Yeah.
Even if it was everything fall down, more or less.
Like worked out, kind of?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it worked out as I was freed of the charges at the court case. But the way I could do that was, it was a work from 1993, and the work was about the Kurdish issue going on in the southeast. It was violent times, and although the work was about that, at the court I had to say it has nothing to do with Turkey. It is women being oppressed by men, because I was using the Priapos figures, and also don't speak, don't hear,
the three wise monkeys.
So that was the way I was freed of the charges, and I cannot work, I cannot, when I say I cannot, like I don't, I should say, I don't show that work in Turkey anymore.
Okay.
Because the lawyers said anytime it would be on exhibition, it can, the same court case can be opened again.
Okay.
So I'm not showing that work anymore to
And
protect
it was
myself.
the only works that you use as ceramic figures since you studied ceramic.
That came later. This work was just ready-made touristic kitschy objects.
Okay. And
the other years later, I was invited for a ceramic biennale
in Savona.
It was artists from all over, from different backgrounds, but the only thing was they asked each artist to make a ceramic new work for the Biennale. So that work came up, the Turkish Delight, it is called.
And even if you studied ceramic in the university
At the beginning,
at the
yes,
beginning,
yeah,
so
yeah.
it was just one artwork about
Just one,
the
I
use
guess.
of
Yeah.
clay.
I mean, I use a lot of materials: clay, glass, crystal, bronze casting, video installations, sound. So it's like a whole big library for me. I mean, I don't have any limits, so it's always like whatever I'm trying to deliver, to narrate, whichever media would work best for me comes up.
So since it's one of the questions maybe about your artist practice, so do you collect any lots of things? Do you started collecting things, ready-made objects, and then you think about how to put into an artwork, or do you especially search something for? How do you work?
At the very beginning, early 90s, I used to collect a lot, like from scrap yards, second-hand shops, etc. I used to get objects a lot. Some would immediately become part of an artwork. Sometimes one would sit in my studio a year or 2 years and then maybe find a way for itself to introduce into my narrative stories. But lately, not like that. So it was like, I can say, 90s, early 90s. I was mostly, my work was based on collecting things and working with ready-made objects.
And then you just...
No, it doesn't go on anymore, yeah.
So you don't have an archive of these things, or do you?
Of course, I do have objects still
But you're not
in my studio. Some are like sitting in my studio, have never been in an exhibition, but for me they are very specific, important things to stay in my studio.
Inspiring object.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, some, as in your home you have your specific objects that you relate yourself a lot with, those kind of things. But since they are not exhibited, they haven't become artworks. Mostly in the last decade, maybe I could say, it comes up sometimes. Of course, you are invited to a group exhibition with a theme. So then you start thinking about specifically on that theme. But if you're on your own, especially for a solo exhibition, nobody says anything to you, so you can do. So it's like sometimes with my own inclinations in that specific period of time, I'm always very open to, in a negative sense, to my surroundings. So whatever is going on negatively around me, I become very affected by it. So they find a way how I narrate it in my works. It has been mostly like that in the last decade, I can say.
Any question? With the microphone, please. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you want something to eat?
Yes. Hi. Sorry, I'm Ziad. I'm from London. I just want to start with what you spoke about at the beginning about using sound in your installations.
Thank you.
And the importance of using the correct artist or musician to create that sound, and the effect of sound on the piece that you are creating. But then, of course, there's the use of the silence. So, in between, and how the oppressiveness of that and the claustrophobia creates, and whether you think about that and the timing of it, when creating a piece?
Yeah, it's a good point because I use presence and absence a lot in my installations. Some of my installations maybe like the one I talked about. I know people like this tree, the X-ray labyrinth. It was without a sound. At first I thought maybe I would use like a breathing sound, but then I gave up the idea. I just want to leave it just like as in a doctor's office. But in most of installations where I use music or audio, there is this thing like absence and presence, and also the voice, as you say, you hear, and then the silence. So it's like this black and white thing. I'm interested in using it. Also, maybe I should add like balloons in the sea, balloons on the sea over here. I'm interested in creating atmospheres. So once you are inside that atmosphere, it is like as if it should surround you in every meaning. So with your backpack, I would say, like with your own history, you are there. A specific way of your being in that specific moment you are visiting the installation, maybe. Also your knowledge of things, thoughts, like, so they are all together for me. So they work all together. I am interested in that. And also, not with this one, Balloons on the Sea, but with some of my installations where it is more like a domestic setup. I also like using presence and absence in a way when you're walking around, as if someone just left and he or she can come back any moment. So that's a little bit like uncanny feeling. I like to use also.
I find it very interesting. For example, in a situation where there's two people in a room but they don't know each other and they're not talking, that kind of scenario. And that's why I thought a lot of your work is quite political. And this claustrophobia that comes from imprisonment, and of course prison is quiet, but having that claustrophobia come through.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I was thinking about that. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's okay. It works.
Hi, my name's Georgina. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I was just interested in, you mentioned the negative environment around you can have an influence on your work. You're obviously very influenced also by being a woman artist. I'm just wondering what would be some of the other influences. For example, in the catalog, it mentions Leonard Cohen.
Oh, yeah.
So are there kind of any main influences that you would say influence the themes of your work, or is it more eclectic?
Leonard Cohen has always been very special for me since my early teens, like 14 maybe. I discovered first time about him. He has always been really special with his songs, with his poems, etc., with his way of being in this world. So I'll answer your question, but I want to go to this thing about when they asked about like a portrait of yourself, a kind of a couple of minutes video. That's
Yes, the artist practice video that
artist practice.
that you can see here, and that's on the Biennale website.
So I thought a lot how to do something, and I came up with using a video that I shot myself. I was alone in the car, so that's nobody else doing the shooting, it's me. And it was because at those years, Ömer Koç, a famous businessman and a very good art collector, he wanted an auto-portrait from me. And I haven't yet done it for him. So at those times, I was obsessed with this idea. Like, I would cry, but sometimes with a reason, sometimes without a reason. So I wanted to capture my crying without a reason times. So turn it into a self-portrait, whether a photograph, a video, or whatever. I did a couple of trials I didn't like, I left them apart, etc. So that is why I was like, and I do this thing, I want to be on my own. I drive along the Bosphorus in Istanbul. I listen to music, I cry, and then go back home. So I thought, I'm crying, maybe I should record myself. So that's why I recorded. And once they asked for artist practice, a self-portrait kind of thing. So I thought, let me use this, since I haven't turned it into a self-portrait for Ömer Koç. So I gave the video to the Biennale. I sent it. And unfortunately, we lost Leonard Cohen afterwards. And I had no titles, no nothing for the video. And then I thought I wouldn't want to be seen like, oh, he died and she's crying after him thing. So I just put a date that it was like 2 years earlier, something I did. And coming back to who, how is moving me. There is a Turkish poet, Edip Cansever, that I like a lot, but unfortunately not as like popular as Nazım Hikmet, not translated. I hope one day his total works will be translated and available for other languages. Each time I go back to his poems, I find something else. And sometimes I use direct quotations from him in my works, sometimes as titles. I like not a specific type of music, but music brings me new ideas, puts me into different feelings, atmosphere, state of minds, etc. So that's a kind of important thing for me when ideas come up as I'm listening to something. Of course, there are like a lot of movies that move you or books, etc. But like Edip Cansever and Leonard Cohen are my favorites, I can mention. Merhaba. Just saw a friend. Ay iyiyim, sen nasılsın?
So I am very excited to be here because really when I saw the title of Open Table, I came here, I decided to come here to see Hale and to meet with you because in 2000, I think, in
It's
Istanbul.
like a time tunnel now, yes?
Yes.
First open table.
I'm a visual artist too, and I have organized a table, discussion table called Open Table. And so it is a very artistic initiative. I don't want to take your role around this table, but I am very excited too. And the aim is very similar, this open table in Istanbul, and since 2000 year. And so we came together in the first time, so that's why remarkable point That's why I am here, because Hale was the first invited artist to my open table, and so we discussed there with the people around multidisciplinary area, like here. And so, thank you very much, and so it's very nice.
Yeah, I'm
to hear you
so happy to
again.
see you.
Yes.
When it is crowded, I don't concentrate on like faces singularly.
Yes,
So I'm like, wow, her name is Mürüvvet Türk Yılmaz, by
Yes.
the way.
And so there's some blogs, blog and WordPress and archive.org, all these conversations in Istanbul with the artists for many years are recorded and loaded on archive.org. If you're interested in the artists in that area and the international area, you can check this website
Yeah.
too. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
If you
Mürüvvet.
ask something, I'm here.
Hale, do you feel safe in Turkey?
No.
And what about your family? Do you have family there that you worry about?
Yes, but my daughter is studying in New York, so at least that brings, like lifts the weight from my shoulders. My mom lives in Izmir, so I mean, I should be frank, like for the last at least 2 years, me and my husband, we have thought a lot about whether we should take steps to move from Turkey to anywhere. And we thought, and I realized that I don't want to live anywhere else. So maybe if I would have gone somewhere, you know, I did study in Britain for an MA, but even at that time I wanted to come back. I wanted to live in Istanbul. But if I would have started living in another country in an earlier age, it would be easier. Now I'm 57 and I have my friends, and also speaking in your own language, your mother tongue, is something really important. And I don't want to lose those. The geography I'm accustomed to, so many reasons. So we came to the idea, like, we don't want to move anywhere else, but I mean, if there would be a kind of a situation that you feel like you have to, then I would rethink about it, of course. But none of us feel safe anymore. I mean, with your tweets, you can be, your turn might come. I was afraid, Haldun Dostoğlu, the owner of the gallery I work with in Istanbul, he said, like, Hale, you are tweeting too much. Maybe you should rethink about this, etc. And for a while I said, yeah, maybe I'm taking a risk to increasing the risk. Yeah. And after a while I said, no, I mean, this is the only thing I can do. I mean, I do whatever I can through my art. And in the social media, I use Twitter. So that is my voice. We used to, in 2013, when the Gezi protests happened, we were all in Taksim Square for days and days. But now we can't do that. Nobody can go out on the streets. If you do, then you're directly, that's an invitation card to be taken into custody. So that's how the life goes on, actually. So it's a kind of a sad situation.
Do you find that other artists are also restricting their form of expression under this regime?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But do you think, for example, that staying in I was considering that if you wanted to stay in Turkey and you don't want to leave, is even because you recognize that doing what you do is maybe trying to improve the situation and to help people understanding and to unveil this condition. And I don't know, because I was reading about your books and the press release, and it was written that this artwork, Balloons on the Sea, was one of on the only positive, optimistic artwork and pieces that you did. But do you think that it's the only one, or do you think that maybe?
Yeah. I mean, it is poetic, for sure. So it takes you in a kind of a, at first, nice atmosphere, etc. But as it lingers on with you, maybe, I mean, it is not that much of a
Joy.
hopeful, joyful thing, you know. It has both sides. So it's like without losing hope, kind of prescription to look at things. Because if nothing works if you lose hope, so you have to hope. Hope is for our like a breathing thing. But with the joyfulness, I can maybe tell a funny story. My mom came to see the exhibition I made in 2013 with this labyrinth of horrific violence, state violence images. Not only state, but also politic fractions. In 80s, there were a lot of assassinations, murders, etc. She and you had to go through this labyrinth to see the rest of the exhibition. And after seeing the rest of the exhibition, you had to go through to the Istiklal Street, back through this labyrinth. That's how the curator of the exhibition wanted it at the first place. And my mom came to see the exhibition. She went till the end of the labyrinth, and then she started crying, and she said, I have to go out back on the street. I cannot even breathe. So we were back on the street, and then she said, promise, Hale, and she knew that I was going to work for a solo exhibition. And she knew that I cried a lot when I was collecting these 3,000 something images. Please make a joyful work next time. So, and it stayed with me, you know, that sentence. And I said, okay, why not? So I used three wise monkeys again. I made a video installation. This time using a 3D model of these three wise monkeys, turning it into like a X-ray look, and like singing with this famous Frank Sinatra song, swinging on the stars. If you don't do your homework, you will become. Do you want to become a pig? Do you want to become a donkey? Kind of silly children song. So that was a joyful one, actually.
But you used lots of time the three wise monkeys in your...
Yeah, from the very beginning.
From the 1992, I suppose.
Yes, first time 1992. With the work that put me in trouble.
Yeah. And so it's one of your characters that you...
I like using it, yeah, from time to time.
The sad thing is that they're still active.
Yeah.
Huh?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just saying, the sad thing is that they're still more than actual.
Oh, yes.
Unfortunately, that's it.
Yeah.
And do you even think that yes, sometimes they say that there was even a fourth monkey. So do you apply of the absence of the fourth monkey in your works? Talking about absence and presence.
No, I just talk about the oppression and the silliness part of it, pretending nothing is going on part of it, which is forced on people. Of course, if they are not forced, maybe they wouldn't do that. I don't want to blame the ones that are trying not to see and hear, but...
Yes, of course. It's a pleasure.
Sorry, nobody else is asking questions.
Yeah,
I have
it's,
lots.
it's your turn. It's a pleasure, absolutely.
Please feel free.
So, you know, you strike me as a very kind of total, but also very feminine person. And we all, the stereotype I have of Turkey and gender right now is that in some ways the country is going backwards officially. Do you see that? Do you feel that? How do you see the role of gender in your work? Do you see it there at all? And does the broader socio-political environment influence you in terms of the gender question?
Yeah, I mean, it has become a subject of some of my works. Maybe I can talk about Nedime Sara, the I saygı, in respect of Nedime Sara, I guess was the title of the work. In the archives of the Women's Research and Library in Istanbul, I came across an article that was a reader's letter published in the first feminist newspaper published during the towards the end of Ottoman period. And this was a letter. In this letter, the young lady was saying that a couple of times she tried to write because the newspaper had a reader's corner. She attempted to write a letter to the newspaper, and she was stopped by her mom, her own mom, in the house, and she was talking about the three-generation women in the house, her grandmother, her mother, and herself, and how women even were oppressing her own mom and grandma. Grandma would say, I don't even know how to read and write. You already know, but this is enough. You shouldn't be writing, sending letters. Her mom tore away her letter a couple of times. And then finally, secretly, she managed to send it. So I turned this into a work at that time. A couple of works I can that deals directly with these issues. And the other part of your question, how it's going on in Turkey nowadays. I mean, they just passed a new law that muftis, like imams, they gave permission for them to do the civil contract that is made only at municipalities, the wedding contract. So it is also given to the muftis now. So, and they claim it won't reduce the rights of women, which are given in the earlier Republic times to the Turkish women. Turkish women were given the right of vote much previous than Western countries, actually. So it was like a gift for us, not for me, but older generations. But there are strong women's movements that are trying to hold on to their rights, and a lot of activism is going on at the same time. But it is a specific period we're going through. So it is really a very strong, oppressive, central governmental power issued on everyone now. When I say everyone, of course, not everyone, but whoever doesn't think like that.
I have a couple of questions. You intrigued me on reality and art, because when you were talking about fake news and so on, you were saying we want to see reality. The question is how an artist sees reality. Can you see reality or can you see art? What's the difference? And so if you're striving to have art reproduced, to have reality reproduced, is it art? Where do you stop? This is the first question. The second question on Turkey. How is the influence of wealthy at the moment Turkey is much more wealthy than it was. You're very rich. The people is very much more much richer than some time ago. What is the influence of this wealth, of this money, on the oppression? Can you sell freedom? Did you accept to sell freedom in Turkey?
Sell freedom?
Sell.
Sell it.
Freedom.
Give money and give your freedom for money. Is this what happened? Yes or no? And how is an artist living this? How you see the money in Turkey?
Can you repeat your first question?
The first question is, you said, in front of fake news, I strive to look at the reality, but I have difficulties in coming to terms how an artist can see reality. Because I tend to believe that you don't see reality. If you want to reproduce reality, it's not a work of art.
Yeah.
There is something there in between.
Yeah, sure.
You and the reality. So what is there? How do you bypass this frame?
I mean, when we were talking about fake news, real news, reality, etc., that is something else, of course, what I was trying to say. Like, it is like you're, as a citizen of any country, it is your duty, your responsibility for the whole society to follow up things, especially for human rights, economic rights, etc. So it's like enlisting gender issues, everything. That is something else. But when it comes to art, the best ever side of it is, of course, that it is not reality. So that is why we love it, I love it. That is why we want to be surrounded by it, because nature is good enough on its own, if not interrupted by, intervened by human. Art and nature is similar power, I think. But sometimes I need to, I feel the need to infuse them together in a way, maybe. Like, as I said, I feel responsible, that responsible side, and also, like in this work over here, it is talking about certain issues, but in a very poetic way. So in that work, reality is a really interesting issue to talk about. And there's a nice article written by Ari Ackermans, and Border of Reality. His title is for the beautiful piece he wrote. So we are always like that, actually, like on borders of reality. So it is not so specific for the time that we are going through. It has, I think it is a state of mind in a way, as our presence, the way we think, live, feel, kind of. The second question you had.
Yes.
Now I remember as the mic went there. Your second question was how the wealth affects arts or life in general. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's connect it with arts. Maybe it's an easier way to start. We started working early in 90s. She's younger than me, but similar times. In 90s, not much people were interested in what we were doing, actually. A small circle of art followers were after us. And installation works were looked down generally, etc. And there were no museums that you can show contemporary art, kind of thing. So with the start of the Istanbul biennials, and also this was 90s, and also in 90s, Turkey started opening up to the world. It was a very enclosed, politically, in foreign affairs especially, it was enclosed into itself. So it was the opening up times. So Istanbul Biennials coincided with that. And it opened up new horizons for everyone, the residents of Turkey, Istanbul, and also visitors coming from abroad to see what's going on in Istanbul. Still at those times, the wealth part was not interested in what was going on in contemporary art. It was a couple of years later, like in 2000s maybe, some families who are like top of the top families in Turkish economics started setting up new museums, etc., with their collections, this and that. So that's how it became like not a big market, but the market thing started. I don't know if it's for the good or bad. You cannot stop it. Life goes on like that. But I miss the early 90s because it was a more precious thing to be with the really interested circles around you. Now it's like more anonymous and more money-oriented sometimes, and also, of course, we have these selfies things now. Just take a selfie in front of artwork and walk, kind of thing. So it has changed. I don't know if it's an answer to your question.
So we were talking about the fact that on Instagram, the photos of Balloons on the sea, it's something like more than 1,000.
Yes,
and more.
Yeah, really. And also people
of course,
play around with it.
Sorry, I wanted to touch back on the point that the lady from Canada, I believe, made about Turkey going backwards in terms of its politically. I'm originally from Kuwait, although I live in London. And I remember, I was born in 1970, so I remember the 70s very well. We had bars. I remember looking at pictures of the wedding of my mother and father. All the women were wearing miniskirts, and it was a mixed wedding. Everybody was holding up champagne. You can't imagine to have that in Kuwait. So I think the region in general is becoming more religious, more you're getting the difference between Sunni and Shia, which never existed in the 70s, or it's only the start of the 80s. And all these sects that are coming out and creating problems and in the region. And I think possibly, I don't want to be too political, but you started it, I have to say.
We're in the middle of it.
I don't like to discuss politics publicly, but I do think that has a lot to do with probably weapons manufacturing companies inserting these.
I was just going to say that.
Yes. Yeah. But yes, unfortunately, it is happening in the region. It's a rich, wealthy part of the world. And to try and create these divisions and create an economy for buying weapons and so on, unfortunately, is part of the reason. But there we go. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah. That's the whole truth, you know. Weapons and oil, nothing else.
And that's, I wanted to add that's kind of a mix between what you both were saying, like the real news and fake news. I'm from the States, and we have real news and fake news, and it gets back to it. And being an artist has nothing to do with it. It's being a person who lives in that society. Yes, there's things that get said on the news, but like if you live there, you're like, no, that's not exactly how it's happening. And like it's also, the point of like going back. living and being from the States now, like obviously I live in London with my husband, but living in this, like talking to my friends and family that live in the States, it's like, you are kind of going back. You know, there's this thing in the States now where they're like, oh, let's make America great again. And when you think of it like that, like, look at it from my perspective where you're like, actually, it was never really great for us. So I'd like to keep going forward, you know? And so it's just, it's all a matter of perspective. And, you know, sometimes perspective is not necessarily going to agree with what should actually be happening or what is happening, you know, in the art world or outside of it.
Exactly.
I wanted to talk about, or discuss maybe the idea of performative act in your work. And your work is very strong, it's very political, and in a sense of, when you talked about your installations, how you make the viewer being immersed in the work. And I think, you know, this kind of very strong work, political work, is also a question how the viewer engages with it, and rather than becoming a passive viewer, would be the same as reading Twitter all this thing, we get all this information. And so there's a way, this sounds a bit a performative act also for the viewer to come in and physically or psychologically embody these works. And is that something you think about, you know, how the viewer can, how can we get a viewer to really engage with it with something beyond the kind of intellectual reading? And is that part of how, when you set up installation, do you kind of think very much about how the viewer becomes part of the work and seen as almost a performative act?
Mm-hmm. Of course, yes, I do. And my aim is to be able to create whatever the installation, the atmosphere, so that it works, but I cannot really know if it works or not. So once you start only through communication, of course, with the feedback, and once you get a feedback that is overlapping with what you have been aiming towards to, it makes you very happy, but it is not necessary. Sometimes it might not overlap. So it's a kind of an open-end thing. You put something over there, and we are all here, we are all different, so I don't know, and I don't want to control, like, for like that. In my at the very beginning of my practice, it was much more direct. So you would see if this is a glass kind of thing. But then, as years went along, it moved into more kind of course, not like really open-ended. I do create a structure, let's say. So there is a structure, but it's also a kind of an open, it has its open ends, let me say.
Thank you.
Yes, reading even about your artworks, I was thinking about that it's just as you offer the opportunity to the spectator, to the visitor, to feel the void, the gap between the absence and the presence, this past and present, and the sensation that you explain in your artwork. So, of course, you cannot force the visitor to do it, but you give them the opportunity to take this part of the story that you are telling us, I think.
Yeah, so it's like a two-sided thing. There is my story, my narration, a kind of a three-dimensional narration that the visitor walks into or encounters with, and brings their own narration on top of it.
Yeah.
So, and that excites me, actually. I like that.
Hale, for your work, how does your gallery sell installation art when it requires so much equipment?
You mean like equipment?
Well, take, for example, what's here, it's 6 or possibly 7 screens that you would need if you acquired that work as a private collector.
For videos, it is usually like you only give the data to the museum or to the collector, and if it's a single channel video projection, or like here, a more complicated with audio and 7-channel projection, then it is up to them, like you give the data sheet, how it would be installed, etc. All the technical details are signed by each side. So you don't give the equipment to them. So whenever that collector or museum wants to show that work, they provide their own equipment.
And do you worry that it might be altered when they have it themselves?
Well, I mean, that is an interesting question, because I was interviewed recently, and the similar issue came up, like how much you can control. Of course, you prepare all these installation templates, etc. But we are ephemeral beings. Once I'm gone, who is going to take care of it? I don't know. But you do your best to have it tracked down in written contracts. But especially when you're using sound, it might become a problem. Here, I don't have any problems. It is just as I wanted, I wanted it to fill the space, so it is working as I wished it to be. So nobody said turn the volume down, etc. But in some cases, even in like Centre Pompidou, for example, was showing a video of mine called Beirut, and the volume was not high enough. It should have been much more higher. And Kristin interfered to make it higher, and they turned it a little bit higher, but not enough. And then she was saying like, oh, museums don't like audio high volume. So control is up to sometimes, I don't know.
So, last question about the biennial. What do you think, if something's changed from your exhibition here in the biennial, or do you think that something is changing about your popularity, for example, of being selected for this exhibition, and if it's something already next? So, what are you doing in the next few months, year?
Well, I mean, it would be funny, but I don't like biennials.
Because you did lots of.
Although I'm here.
Yeah.
They are not art lover friendly, because it is exhausting, even for me, that I'm so interested. But to see a lot of works, especially if you are not living in that city, I have the luxury now in Istanbul. I saw some parts of the Istanbul Biennial now, not all. So I'm taking my time, doing in my own pace, etc. But like visiting another country, a city, to see the biennial, it becomes hectic, trying to see everything. And for example, yesterday, although I had seen it before, but of course it was the preview days, Candice Bright's video. I was there for an hour and a half, Alec Baldwin and Juliana Moore, and it had a much more deeper effect on me, of course, to be able to be there calmly, relaxed, like just for that work, etc. So it is a difficult thing, biennials, and also In my younger days, I used to think, oh, biennials are really important, and I have been into quite many biennials, but I don't think like that anymore. I changed, I think. I don't believe in hierarchical things. I don't want to. Also, I try to refuse that way of thinking. It is not for good, I think, to think hierarchically. Yes, we know Venice Biennial is one of the most important ones, yes, but at the end, you are here, you are seeing artworks. Nothing changes. I mean, so...
But don't you think that maybe all these biennials that are all over the world, or exhibition like Documenta, or else give the opportunity even to spread the art all over the world, and to help maybe
yes,
the
for
world
sure.
getting a little bit better?
Of course, yes, for sure. I only talked about the difficulty of seeing too many artworks next to each other. Of course, as I also mentioned earlier on, how Istanbul biennials helped Istanbul art circles, artists, and also art admirers. It was very important, educational, impressive years that followed each other. Now it's, I don't know, what's the number of the Istanbul Biennial now? I forgot. It's been many years. So of course it is very important. It helps a lot, and also especially for the inhabitants of that city to bring in artworks from all over the world. It is something not easy for people who are not able to travel, and there are a lot of people who are not able to travel.
And so you don't you think that maybe your artwork here, exhibiting here, is engaged into any conversation with the other artworks surrounding you? So do you think at your ease in the pavilion of colors, or do you think that it's not?
I mean,
I asked this question to all the artists. It's not just
you. No worries. Some people are getting in contact with me through social media, Facebook or Twitter, this and that, and reaching me with their positive feedbacks that you don't hear negative ones usually. But some people, because of the information plate each artist has at next to the entrance, some of the viewers say that they don't see or feel as it is claimed in the written text that it has political issues, that it is a very poetical, relaxing work for them. So as we were talking, it is up to people, you cannot know. So yes, I am in the pavilion of colors. I also feel and see the work poetically, but political work. So pavilion of colors maybe not really fitting into my way of looking at it, but it is a matter of perspective, as we were also talking about. Yeah.
And what's next?
What's next? I hope I will work.
Are you already planning some other exhibition, or are you taking a rest after the...
I already took a rest, like I had, for the last 2 years, I had to work on 2 of my older installations that they didn't exist. I didn't have means to protect them. One was the work called The Closet I made for the Art Pace in San Antonio years ago, and at Salt Institute in Istanbul they wanted to show it, so it was recreated from scratch. And also another work of mine which didn't exist, I also had to rework on it. It's called We Didn't Go Outside, We Were Always on the Outside. We didn't go inside, we were always on the inside. It was shown in New York by Proto Cinema, so I recreated that from scratch again. So it took a lot of my time for going back into old works, which I don't like much. But these were two important occasions, and I took pleasure in recreating them. And then I also had a difficult time. I was like feeling too I was really high anxieties, and actually at the time when I was seeing Christine Massel in Paris, she asked the same question to me, what are you working on? And I told her, I'm trying not to work because I cannot work. I'm like, I'm trying to calm myself down. And so I delayed.
Delayed?
Postponed. I postponed 2 solo exhibitions. So now I'm gonna work for those 2 solo exhibitions, which is for Galeri Nev in Istanbul and Green Art Gallery in Dubai.
And it was very interesting, the things that you were saying about the closet and the other installation. How it is recreate an installation? Do you, for example, I was thinking about the closet that you have the radio broadcast as a sound. So you still have that broadcaster, or you actualize? No, you have the single.
It was from the TRT, Turkish Radio Television Archives.
Yeah. So you have all
I had that, but everything else was And for the guardhouse surrounded by barbed wires, my first reaction was, since it was a found guardhouse in the old customs depot in Istanbul, which is now Istanbul Modern Museum, that I used, and I thought it cannot be redone. But Marie Spirito, with her high energies, she convinced me that I can do it.
You could do it.
So I did it. It took a long time, but a new guardhouse, I worked on it to look like an old, exactly same. So in that, I had the
postcard.
The one postcard, the 2 wrestlers, and also the radio, pocket radio that I used, which was actually not the radio playing. Of course, a hidden audio source was connected to it. So from that on, I worked like a detective to make the dimensions of the whole guardhouse, and I recreated it. It took like 6 months or something.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
you told you don't like vinyls. Yes, I too, but I don't like vinyls too. That's what is the reason, the same reason. But and you told again, maybe you change as an artist your taste or your expectations, but I think the vinyls are changing too much, faster than the artists, because of they demand, or as the institution, they demand the artist from the artist to be visible, and so this is very dangerous for the artistic rhythmic to produce, to think, everything, and so. We discussed all these things during the open table, I remember now, and so really, so we came the same point after many years. Really ironic for me too, and maybe the biennals can change the rotation to present or represent the many the formatic taste or the forms, the aesthetically, instead of to represent the artists or the artworks around the world to be visible. And so, yes, I'm an artist, I am produce think artwork, art as an art object, but really in the last years I had thought that the form is coming very, you know, unnecessary for me. Maybe to talk, to discussion among the artists or among the creators are more important for me too, and so.
I mean, it has its ups and downs, you know.
Yes, this is not the main aim. This is the question for me too, because we are really living in Turkey. This has geographical difficulty for the artists too. We are sharing the same logical position, and in this 15th Biennale now, in the Turkey, in this political situation, there is really important critical things that it is very passive Biennale to open a discussion of the geographical political side of Turkey. So maybe the biennales should think more something about the artworks, forms, aesthetically, and to share with the public art. I don't know. This is my question. Thank you.
Other questions? So, thank you very much to all of you. Thanks
Hale.
For
everyone. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks a lot.
Maybe you can eat something.
Maybe. Maybe.